Hi, it's Mr. C here, and we're going to do another guided reading book. This one is the Read at Home Level 5B. It's called The Lost Voice. Remember, we'll do this in 4 parts. We'll do a picture walk, we'll do an echo read, a read aloud, and of course an independent read at the end. All right, let's get started on this one. So this is the Read at Home Level 5B called The Lost Voice. We'll go through this book. The first round here is just to do a picture walk only, so just looking at the pictures. Talk about what you see in the pictures. So what do we have happening here? Where are they? And what's happening here in this picture? And what's Floppy doing here? Now on this big page, what is Floppy doing here? Where is he going? Now what is Floppy doing? Where is he? Now where's Floppy? What is he up to? What is he getting into? What things do you see in the picture? Now what's happening in this page? What do you see Floppy doing here? And what's happened here? In this big double picture, what's Floppy doing now? Now what's happened? In this picture, what's Floppy stepping on? What's going on? What is Floppy watching? What's happening here? Now where is Floppy going? And what is Floppy doing here? Uh-oh, what's Floppy done now? And where is Floppy, and why is he here? Now what's happening in this picture? And now what's happening? Okay, we're going to go through the book the second time, and I've got my handy yellow highlighter for seeing the words. This is the story of The Lost Voice. Chip didn't feel very well. His throat was sore and he couldn't talk. "Chip has lost his voice," said Dad. "Oh no," thought Floppy. Mom took Chip to the doctor. Dad took Biff and Kipper to school. Floppy was all on his own. "Chip has lost his voice," he thought sadly. "I wish I could help him." "I know," thought Floppy. "I'll go and find Chip's voice. I'm good at finding things." He wagged his tail and ran upstairs. Floppy ran into Chip's bedroom. He looked under the bed. He found a ball, a toy car, a sticky sweet, and a dusty sock. But he didn't find Chip's lost voice. Floppy looked in the toy box. He found lots of toys and lots of books. But he didn't find Chip's lost voice. Ring! Suddenly the phone rang. There are voices in the phone, thought Floppy. I bet Chip's voice is in there. Floppy hit the phone with his paw. Crash! It fell down. A voice said, "Hello? Is anyone there?" But it wasn't Chip's voice. Floppy looked at the radio. There are voices in the radio, he thought. I bet Chip's voice is in there. He hit the radio with his paw. Nothing happened. He hit it harder and harder. Crash! The radio fell over, and someone started to sing. What a horrible noise, thought Floppy. That isn't Chip. I bet Chip's voice is in the television, thought Floppy. He ran to look. His paw hit the switch, and the television came on. Floppy saw a dog on the television. It ran out of a shop with a big bone. Wow, that bone looks good, thought Floppy. The dog ran faster and faster. A voice shouted, "Stop! Stop that dog!" That isn't Chip, thought Floppy, and he went back upstairs. Floppy saw Teddy on Kipper's bed. Teddy, he thought, I bet Teddy has got Chip's voice. Floppy shook Teddy hard. Grrr, growled Teddy. Help, barked Floppy. He dropped Teddy and he ran into Biff's bedroom. Whoosh! Floppy went skidding across the floor. Crash! Biff's clock fell over. Wake up, it shouted. Floppy was scared. He hid under Chip's bed and shut his eyes. Soon he was fast asleep. Chip came home. He was feeling a lot better now. Where are you, Floppy? He called. Floppy jumped up. Chip has found his voice, he thought. He wagged his tail and ran downstairs. Just then, Biff came in. Her throat was sore and she couldn't talk. Biff has lost her voice, said Dad. Oh no, thought Floppy. Here's some questions we might be able to ask now that we have a better understanding of what happened in the story. So, first question is, why did Dad say that Chip had lost his voice? Where did Floppy look for Chip's voice? What do you think happened next? What would Floppy find if he looked under your bed? Okay, we're going to go through the book a third time. This time it's going to be an echo read. Remember, Mr. C reads first, and then you read next. So the title of the book is called The Lost Voice. Your turn. Okay, Mr. C's turn. Chip didn't feel very well. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. His throat was sore and he couldn't talk. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Chip has lost his voice, said Dad. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Oh no, thought Floppy. Your turn. Remember, you can always pause the video to try again, or rewind. Mr. C's turn. Mom took Chip to the doctor. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Dad took Biff and Kipper to school. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Floppy was all on his own. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Chip has lost his voice, he thought sadly. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. I wish I could help him. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. I know, thought Floppy. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. I'll go and find Chip's voice. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. I'm good at finding things. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. He wagged his tail and ran upstairs. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Floppy ran into Chip's bedroom. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. He looked under the bed. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. He found a ball, a toy car, a sticky sweet, and a dusty sock. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. But he didn't find Chip's lost voice. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Floppy looked in the toy box. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. He found lots of toys and lots of books. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. But he didn't find Chip's lost voice. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Ring. Suddenly, the phone rang. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. There are voices in the phone, thought Floppy. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. I bet Chip's voice is in there. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Floppy hit the phone with his paw. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Crash! It fell down. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. A voice said, Hello, is anyone there? Your turn. Mr. C's turn. But it wasn't Chip's voice. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Floppy looked at the radio. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. There are voices in the radio, he thought. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. I bet Chip's voice is in there. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. He hit the radio with his paw. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Nothing happened. He hit it harder and harder. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Crash! The radio fell over and someone started to sing. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. What a horrible noise, thought Floppy. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. That isn't Chip. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. I bet Chip's voice is in the television, thought Floppy. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. He ran to look. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. His paw hit the switch and the television came on. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Floppy saw a dog on the television. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. It ran out of a shop with a big bone. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Wow, that bone looks good, thought Floppy. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. The dog ran faster and faster. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. A voice shouted, "Stop! Stop that dog!" Your turn. Mr. C's turn. That isn't Chip, thought Floppy, and he went back upstairs. Your turn. Floppy saw Teddy on Kipper's bed. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Teddy, he thought. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. I bet Teddy has got Chip's voice. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Floppy shook Teddy hard. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Grrr, growled Teddy. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Help, barked Floppy. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. He dropped Teddy and ran into Biff's bedroom. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Whoosh! Floppy went skidding across the floor. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Crash! Biff's clock fell over. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Wake up! It shouted. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Floppy was scared. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. He hid under Chip's bed and shut his eyes. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Soon he was fast asleep. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Chip came home. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. He was feeling a lot better now. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Where are you, Floppy? He called. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Floppy jumped up. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Chip has found his voice, he thought. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. He wagged his tail and ran downstairs. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Just then, Biff came in. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Her throat was sore and she couldn't talk. Your turn. Mr. C's turn. Biff has lost her voice, said Dad. Your turn. And Mr. C's turn. Oh no, thought Floppy. And your turn. Okay, we're ready for time number 4 through this book. We've done a picture walk, we've done a read aloud, we have done an echo read. Now it's time for you to do an independent read. I'll point to the words, you read them. Remember, pause the video if you need a little longer, rewind the video, and it's a good idea to try and practice through the same book over and over and over and over until you can read the whole story all the way through. No mistakes, no need for help, and the speed of your reading voice is the same speed that you would talk with. All right, let's give it a try. Start with the title. Well done. Keep practicing.